Hello, welcome to Background Briefing. Let's say you are looking to take a flight. It's a Friday afternoon. You show up at the airport only to be greeted by throngs of people who've just been told all of their bookings have been cancelled. That was in fact the situation at multiple airports all around the world after the CrowdStrike software went down, taking various Microsoft servers with it. And not just flights, at airports, hotel bookings, banks. Many companies that use Microsoft services at its backbone were similarly impacted. Now, clearly, there have been some repercussions of that, with Microsoft rethinking its strategy of allowing vendors such as CrowdStrike to gain access to certain parts of its software. But the bottom line still is, for us in user land, what lessons are to be drawn from that? And in fact, if you are a journalist who's writing on this topic, what are some of the insights that you need to know about what goes on in the background when these sort of crises strike? Our special guest today is Josephine Galla, who's a seasoned IT specialist. She's been in the business for almost 20 years, dealing with very large-scale software and their very large-scale, often multinational customers. Josephine Galla, nice to talk to you. Good afternoon.
Thank you for having me. Hi.
Tell me first about what your initial reaction was when we heard not only of the outage of the software, but in fact, the whole system that it seemingly took along with it.
Well, I was rather stunned by the absolute standstill of the majority of businesses. I do understand that if you are using a specific software, and frankly, I do believe that that Microsoft actually got all the heat without having actually been the culprit in this situation. You always have to anticipate that something may go wrong with an upgrade, with an update, with the security patch. The question here that was also stated in the news was, didn't anybody test it beforehand? So let's start there. Why wasn't it? Or was it, and what went wrong? But on the other hand, it was multinationals that were actually holding off their business from running. If you are an airline, you would kind of assume that you have a business contingency plan. We are looking at a ticket sales that is completely automated. Most of us book their tickets online. You don't go into a shop anymore. You have to submit all your data. You have to give your credit card information, your passport information, and that runs all the way to the plane. In fact, the first time you actually see somebody, if you're traveling light, is at the plane. And that's where the human interaction starts taking place. So the question that we have to ask is why all this data is actually in the system, and you still have to revert back to checking in people online or by hand that were supposedly to be checked online. So for me, the stunning part was the absolute inagility, which in my eyes is an absolute lack of anticipation and preparedness. So a security badge gone wrong is nothing that has never happened before. Maybe not at this scale, but we have to anticipate this. And specifically, if you're a company that uses technology as a backbone of their business, you need to have a plan. And it is not the first crisis that has hit the market. If you look at COVID, if you look at the invasion, in the last just 2 years, there were so many crises that caused ripple effects that I would have anticipated a lot of companies would have used their strategy meetings to think about, okay, what happens if there is a major disruption that we have to work around without losing millions of euro, dollars, whatever currency, within a day or two. So that was something that stunned me specifically because there were so many big companies affected and there was a sense of helplessness. Everybody looked at Microsoft and for a fix. And that was, in my eyes, something like a delegation of responsibility.
Well, to some extent, many companies have business continuity plans, BCPs, right? They do build scenarios around everything that could possibly go wrong based on a risk assessment and a risk management plan. So is it that a software patch like this simply wasn't part of the BCP, or the BCP was there, but they didn't execute on it?
It seems to me like a bit of a pattern. I obviously don't know all the company's business contingency plans, but if you go back to COVID, to our pandemic, obviously it is rather hard to anticipate a pandemic. But is it though? We did have early outbreaks of other viruses also happened in Asia, where entire cities were locked down. So it wasn't necessarily something that has never happened. So why isn't it part of a BPC, of a business contingency plan, BCP? The question rather is, are we really good in anticipating some of the disruptions? And if we do it case by case, we will end up having a disruption, learning from it, putting it in, and probably never having to execute on it again. But there is a way of navigating the ripple effects, to navigate through the crisis rather quickly and creating a great customer experience despite the problem that you're facing. But there's also a certain amount of, should you have looked into the rest of the market and seen what are the biggest disruptions? So everybody is talking about AI. Everybody is talking about technology trends, but very few companies have learned out of the corona effect of supply chains. So what did companies do? We must now sell supply chain products. We must help companies to create a seamless experience. But a supply chain topic is very complex, and only a few companies are really, really able and capable to really support your supply chain issues and create a seamless supply chain end to end. So you can't do that within 2 weeks. The people or the companies that did that had already anticipated and are experts in that subject matter. And this is what I'm talking about. If you are in an airline, working in an airline, you probably had more than one disruption, be it caused through CrowdStrike or be it caused through something else. I don't know, volcano outbreaks where flights are grounded, no access to electricity. So what do you do when you have 300 people needing to enter and board the plane? Do you really have to write down every single name by hand, or should there be something that you can use to at least expedite the process?
Well, but isn't that the crux of the matter? And as remote as that sounds, the volcano outbreak, of course, we had that a few years ago in Iceland, right, when many flights across Western Europe were downed, or at least stopped from taking off. Question, though, is what really are the possible contingencies? Because you worked in IT or have been working in IT for so many years. Isn't the contingency usually to fall back on another system rather than saying we're going to go totally offline and do everything by paper again?
Well, that depends really on the crisis. And the best companies are the ones that have leaders that know how to quickly navigate a crisis and navigate the ripple effects. Not always can you revert back to technologic solutions. Let's say if you have a volcano outbreak and you have no access to electricity, and I'm mentioning it because I was part of the passengers waiting to be checked in manually back then, you have nothing to fall back on when it comes to technology. But most likely you have a passenger manifest and you have it in a physical shape or form. So the question is really, what is the solution right ahead of you when the crisis hits? But have you also thought about it beforehand and maybe have one or two or three places or one or two, three solutions at hand? Maybe they may be manual, but if you've thought about it, if you trained before for this kind of crisis, this is why we do fire drills. You are more likely to succeed. You are much faster. You can offer solutions much faster. And that is where I think the tech world has struggled in the last 2 decades. The adjustment period between I've learned something new, I'm going to make this part of my contingency plan, and when really disaster hits, crisis hits, then I know what to do. That hasn't happened. And it has specifically not happened during the Corona crisis. It took some company far too long to discover Teams, to discover Zoom, to discover that online meetings can actually be a thing. And we see the trend now going back because apparently it is much more effective and productive for most companies to work from the office. That's a debate for another day. But if you look back on the 24th February of 2 years ago, companies took very, very long, specifically tech companies, to understand what this war meant for them. Customers no longer were dealing in, we need to digitize our customer experience. We need an ERP system to run our backbone. No, customers went straight to who's going to protect my assets. And very, very few companies were actually able to offer something because they already had it in their portfolio, they are already experts, and they anticipated quite clearly that this is going to be something that customers will look at, because in a crisis, customers revert back to the essentials, not to the it's good for business, or even more the layer of it is really nice to have, it makes a difference for our business, and we look more shiny than others.
Are you suggesting then that there's a bit of an unoriginality in that risk assessment, that some risks are simply perceived to be so remote that we don't need to have a plan for them, or that companies simply haven't fully investigated all the risks that could possibly strike them, and therefore they don't have a risk management plan?
To be a little bit divisive here, I think most companies are very complacent. They have been very successful. They have been successful for 20, 30, 40, 50 years with doing the same thing over and over, sometimes renaming it, sometimes bringing some innovation into the market. Problem with complacency is it also makes you a little bit lazy, and it also makes you a little bit blind. So the threat of losing business kind of goes away when you are a market leader. Like, everybody should buy our software. We are the market leader. And that then leads to a underinvestment into teams that do nothing but anticipating risks, that teams that do nothing but creating plans and strategic blueprints, how to deal with specific crises. In fact, most companies that I've worked with during the crisis, during the war, just started to create blueprints. Oh, how do we react? Do we need to evacuate employees? That's a question that has been asked and couldn't been answered. And it was down to the leader of the country to take a decision, because no one would, because no one has anticipated it. So I think complacency is one part of it. And maybe also the lack of diversity. And we're not going into the D&I subject. I'm talking about mindsets. You cannot just have executives like myself that have been 20 years in the IT business. You need bright minds from the outside, maybe physical security, maybe politicians in your team to help create a plan that anticipates as best as possible, and then creates the contingency plan and the blueprint how to react. And I think we've become a little bit of a tech-only crew, where we have a very narrow view, and we are not as open and as wide-eyed as we should be to anticipate threats.
Well, to borrow another example or a parallel also from the airline industry, have you ever been on a plane where the automated safety video doesn't play? So sometimes you're on the flight, and in the seat back in front of you on the screen, that's where they play back the safety announcement. But sometimes it doesn't fire. And then you hear the cabin crew get on the intercom and say, "Cabin crew stand by for safety demonstration." And then they scurry around, quickly find their spare oxygen masks and life vests in order to then physically demonstrate what is usually played out on the screen. So it sounds a little bit like we do need to have that offline contingency in case all else fails in the online world. Even, no matter which system you have or online systems you have as a contingency, we will need to have an offline fallback. Is that the message?
Correct. Correct. I fully agree, because not every solution lies within tech, and I love technology, having worked in that environment for almost 20 years. Some solutions are just very offline, as you said it. The other part is also to be able to understand when do you need an offline solution, or can you have a quick fix? Can you have a quick workaround on some things? Not every disruption is like the ones we've just read about in the news, but the reality is it's always good to have an offline solution for possibly an online problem, or to understand that specific online problem no longer is a problem. Let's move to the essential problem. I'm referring back to the Ukrainian-Russian war, where the government within 24 hours decided we no longer are looking into on-prem solutions for software. We are now looking into cloud, which was interesting because we have been in conversations with them for quite some time to move the government towards the cloud. They didn't see the need. They were more interested in having their data inside their government. And when the first rocket hit, the immediate need became quite clear. And it was the first time for me to see a government issuing a law, approving the law, promoting the law, from we no longer do this. We now need to have all of our operations in the cloud to be protected, not because they needed to be in the cloud, but because they needed to continue to serve their citizens. So that was a very classic, okay, there is an offline threat that can have an impact on our technology. Do we choose a different variation to make sure that we can continue to serve our citizens?
Just finally then, is there a halfway mark between online with all the vendors and all the cloud-based systems and an offline paper-based world? Is there something in the middle where companies perhaps ought to develop their own software? Even if one of the large vendors introduces a bug in a software update, as we saw with CrowdStrike, that they have their own proprietary system to fall back on?
Well, that depends on the nature of your business. Obviously, having worked in IT for so long, I feel that standard software has its place in most of the companies, because there is a certain experience, there's a certain protection that is provided. I believe that at the moment where we are now, with all the technology trends that are coming and going, there has to be a solution with the vendor that you trust the most. Now, easy to say, because I'm quite sure that what just happened was also a trust-based relationship between two vendors. But it actually shows that you have to have a recovery plan. You have to make sure you don't lose your data. You have to make sure that your data centers are all up to date when it comes to SLAs. Do I recommend to print the passenger manifest and have stacks of paper? Obviously not. Do I believe that you have a chance to expedite the process? Absolutely. I'm not an airline expert, but I'm pretty sure the data was not just held in one singular system. So I think what we need to look at is how to protect our assets, our online assets. And I believe cybersecurity, and a very smart gentleman called it actually cyber resilience, is the key moving forward to ensure that those things do not happen, because cyber resilience does evolve around more than just preventing attacks from happening. It actually deals exactly with that. There's an offline event. What do we do with our assets? There's an online event. How do we protect our assets? So it's way more than just trying to fend off a cyber attack.
It's great to talk to you. Thank you for your insights today. Josephine Galla, seasoned IT expert, joining us here on Background Briefing.
Thank you so much.